Good evening, dear listener. I'm Selene, your boring storyteller. Tonight, we step softly into a chapter of history that smells faintly of leather, dust, and wood smoke. The world of the working cowboy in the 1800s. Whether you're settling into bed, already drifting beneath heavy blankets, or even sitting on the world's most reflective porcelain seat, yes, that one. I'm honored to have your company. If you're new here, do feel free to subscribe for more sleepy stories like this one. Tonight, the magic door we step through is not carved of oak or inlaid with gold, but rough-hewn and swinging on rusty hinges somewhere in a forgotten corner of the American frontier. Push it open and you'll vanish, not into saloon gunfights or the glossy myths of Hollywood, but into the dust-bitten, bone-tired truth of a cowboy's life. The air smells of campfire ash and sun-baked grass. Far off, the low murmur of cattle folds into the faint jingle of a bridle chain. The horizon is still black with night, but the stars are beginning to dim. It is here, in this fragile half-light, that the cowboy's day begins. The life of a cowboy in the 1800s was a mixture of rugged independence, relentless labor, and an unspoken bond with the land and animals he worked alongside. There was no clock to punch, no fixed hours, only the demands of the trail and the unyielding rhythm of nature. Hollywood likes to give you the wide, clean brim of the hat, the easy grin, the quick draw at noon. But reality was grittier, heavier, a test of muscle, patience, and will. The pay was meager, the days were long, the comfort was almost none. And yet for some men, it was the only life they wanted. Dawn was the cowboy's true alarm clock. Long before the sun breached the horizon, when the air was sharp and still, the camp began to stir. Horses shifted in the dark, hooves clicking softly against the earth. Somewhere, the cook rattled pans, coaxing a thin blue flame from the coals to boil coffee strong enough to stand a spoon upright. Breakfast was quick, a tin cup of bitter coffee, maybe a strip of bacon or a biscuit if the chuck wagon was generous. Cowboys worked in crews, and their first task was to bring in the remuda, the night herd of spare horses. Each man would choose his mount for the day, a decision as practical as it was personal. A fresh, steady horse could carry you through the miles of heat and dust ahead, but a bad choice could make the day twice as hard. And so, with the sky paling in the east and the stars fading like smoke, the cowboy swung into the saddle. The leather creaked beneath him. The reins felt cool and worn in his hands, and the trail waited in silence, holding its breath for the day to come. Thank you, for sharing this quiet moment in time with me tonight. May the dust of the trail settle softly around you, the firelight fade to embers, and your thoughts wander like drifting cattle beneath an endless prairie sky. By sunrise, the real work began. The first priority was to move the herd to fresh grazing land. In the thin morning light, the open range stretched in every direction. A patchwork of grass, dry soil, and shadowed gullies where the cattle sometimes strayed. The herd could be scattered across miles, and it might take hours to gather them, riding in wide arcs, the sound of hoofbeats rolling across the land. The cowboys' horses knew the work as well as their riders, leaning into turns, anticipating the nudge of the reins or the sharp whistle that meant to cut left or right. A good roping arm could save hours, snaring a steer before it disappeared into a ravine. A poor one could mean a long, solitary chase under a rising sun. For those working closer to home on the ranch, the morning might bring a different challenge. Fence lines had to be checked, and by the mid-1800s, barbed wire was beginning to snake its way across the West. It was cheaper than wooden fencing and quicker to set up. But it had a cruel way of tearing at clothes, skin, and horseflesh if left broken. Windstorms could topple posts. Snow could warp the line. A single gap was an invitation for cattle to wander, and every missing cow was money gone. So with pliers at the hip and rolls of wire over the saddle horn, the cowboys would ride the perimeter, patching, tightening, making the barrier whole again. And then there was branding, a grim but necessary ritual. The smell of singed hair hung heavy in the air, the heat of the iron rising in shimmering waves from the coals. Teams worked in a rhythm as old as ranching itself. One roping, another wrestling the animal still, another pressing the hot iron against hide. A sharp bellow split the air, the sound echoing off the empty land. But when the animal was released, it bolted free. The mark proof of ownership, should it stray. The work demanded timing, muscle, and a tolerance for the grit and sweat that clung to skin long after the job was done. But the American West offered more than just hard labor. It offered challenges that no human could control. In summer, the heat could burn through hat brims and blister the backs of hands in a matter of hours. The air so dry it seemed to steal the moisture from your lungs. In winter, the wind came like a living thing, sharp and cold enough to cut through wool and leather, numbing fingers and faces until they ached. Rain could come in sheets, turning trails into sucking mud, the ground swallowing hoof prints before they could be followed. Drought meant days without water for the herd, their ribs beginning to show, their pace slowing. And always there was the land itself, stubborn, dangerous, and beautiful. Cattle might have to be driven up rocky slopes, the sound of hooves sending loose stones skittering down into the valleys below. Forests swallowed sound, hiding strays behind trunks and undergrowth. Rivers, calm one hour, could rise in an angry swell the next, the current pulling at man and beast with equal force. One wrong decision could cost a steer, a horse, or a life. But it was here, in this constant dance between man, beast, and earth, that the cowboy's mind was shaped. Theirs was a kind of quiet knowledge, the skill to read the sky for coming storms, to taste the air and know if snow was near, to see the tremble in a horse's ears and understand danger before it arrived. This was the heart of the cowboy, not just endurance, but the ability to bend with the will of the West and keep moving forward. And now, dear listener, as the sun climbs higher and the long day stretches ahead, we will leave our cowboy on the trail, the horizon shimmering with heat, the wind already rising. May the sound of the herd's slow footsteps fade into your thoughts like the hum of a lullaby, and may your mind drift as easily as the clouds over a wide and endless sky. By midday, both the cowboys and their horses needed a rest. The sun was now high and heavy, its light pouring across the open range in waves that shimmered above the grass. The horses' flanks were damp with sweat, their breathing steady but deep after the morning's work. The men reined in near the chuck wagon, where the camp cook had been busy over the fire since before dawn. Lunch was simple and fast. Beans simmered in a cast-iron pot, a hard biscuit or two, sometimes a strip of bacon or fresh game, if luck had been kind that week. They would wash it down with coffee, so strong it seemed to carry the heat of the sun itself, or water drawn from the canteen, tasting faintly of metal. Some found a patch of shade beneath the sparse trees, while others sat in the grass, leaning back against saddles or bedrolls. Voices rose and fell in lazy conversation. Short stories about near misses on the trail, a good horse traded, or a rustler caught the year before. For a brief moment, the endless expanse of the West seemed still, and the cowboys took comfort in the rare quiet that midday offered. But the break was always short. When the sun began to dip slightly westward, the men mounted again, returning to the work that seemed never to end. The afternoon might be spent sweeping the range for strays, riding far into gullies or wooded pockets where cattle had wandered. Mending fences under the harsh light was a constant necessity, the metallic twang of pulled wire punctuating the dry air. Every cowboy kept one eye on the herd, and another on the horizon, watching for the telltale dust or movement that could mean cattle rustlers. Men who could undo weeks of labor in a single night. If trouble came, there was little time to deliberate. Sometimes a rider would be sent back to alert the ranch owner. Other times, decisions were made on the spot, the men relying on each other's judgment as much as their own. Maintaining gear was also an afternoon ritual. Saddles were inspected for wear, leather was oiled to keep it supple, and ropes were coiled carefully, checked for frays. A snapped cinch or a weakened bridle strap could be the difference between control and disaster. Each piece of equipment was a lifeline, and treating it as anything less was a risk no cowboy could afford. As the heat softened and the sky began its slow fade toward gold, the evening work began. The cattle were brought together again, their low, rhythmic calls echoing across the prairie. Horses were unsaddled, their hides brushed down, manes smoothed with quick practice strokes. They were given water first, always the animals before the men, and a measure of feed. Saddles were wiped free of dust, bridles hung neatly, and the day's small damages repaired. Dinner was a quiet, steady affair. Beans thickened from the morning's pot, biscuits warmed on the fire, and strips of bacon crisped until they curled. The smell of wood smoke and coffee rose into the cooling air, mingling with the faint scent of trampled grass. Some cowboys leaned close to the flames, telling stories or humming familiar tunes, while others gazed at the horizon, letting the solitude of the prairie settle into them like a second skin. Sleep was not a luxury here. It was a necessity. Each man unrolled his bedroll on the hard ground, the stars beginning to bloom overhead. The fire crackled low, the herd shifted softly in the dark, and the vast silence of the west wrapped around camp like a blanket. And now, dear listener, as the night deepens over the trail and the last chords of a cowboy song fade into the starlight, may your own thoughts wander into that same quiet. Let the wind across the prairie smooth the edges of your day, and may sleep find you easily, like a horse returning home after a long ride. The physical toll of a cowboy's life in the 1800s was immense. Long hours in the saddle rubbed the thighs raw and left muscles aching deep into the night. Hands, already rough from rope work, blistered anew with every long drive, the skin cracking under the dry sun and coarse fibers. The work never came without risk. A rope slipping could burn a line of fire across the palm. A startled steer could kick out with enough force to shatter bone. And a bad fall from the saddle could mean weeks of pain. or an injury that ended a cowboy's ability to ride altogether. But the mental demands were no less punishing. Days might stretch into weeks, with only the low bellow of cattle and the creak of leather for company. Hours passed in a solitude so wide it seemed to hum in the air. And in that quiet, a man had only his own thoughts for company. It was a life that required patience, a steady temperament, and the ability to act decisively when trouble came. As modern cowboy Waddy Mitchell would later say, "You don't learn much when everything goes right. It's the things that go wrong that show you who you are." And for the cowboys of the West, things went wrong often enough to test the spirit of even the most seasoned rider. A broken saddle strap miles from camp, a spooked herd charging toward a ravine, a sudden thunderstorm turning dry gullies into raging torrents. These were problems that left no time for hesitation. Quick thinking and a level head were as vital as a strong back or steady hands. The isolation also bred a fierce independence. A cowboy might ride with a crew, but much of his survival rested on his own ability to endure, repair, and adapt. This self-reliance, forged on the open range, became the cornerstone of the cowboy's spirit, as much a part of him as his hat or his horse. After weeks or months on the trail, the thought of coming to town was a beacon in the distance. Town meant more than supplies and pay. It meant noise, light, and human warmth after the vast, empty quiet of the range. Saloons spilled lamplight into dusty streets. Dance halls throbbed with fiddle tunes, boots stomping against wood floors. Gambling parlors promised a turn of luck, whether good or bad, and the company of strangers who seemed like old friends after a drink or two. Town was where a cowboy might spend his pay in a night, drinking, dancing, gambling, before the trail called him back again. Town was freedom, brief and bright, but it was also fleeting. By the next sunrise, or the one after, the horizon would open once more, and the dust of the trail would swallow the memory of lamplit streets. Through it all, a cowboy's tools were his lifelines. The saddle was more than a seat. It was a home, a carrier for gear, a place built to keep a man steady through endless hours of riding. The rope, especially the lariat, was an extension of the cowboy's own hands, looping through the air to catch cattle, secure loads, or serve in emergencies, where quick action could mean the difference between safety and disaster. Firearms were carried as insurance, protection against rustlers, predators, and sometimes the unpredictable turns of human nature on the frontier. But above all, the horse was the true partner. Without a good mount, a cowboy was nearly helpless. Horses were chosen with care, trained for endurance, agility, and a keen sense of the herd's movement. Bonds formed between rider and horse ran deep, built on trust, earned mile by mile, day by day. The cowboy depended on his horse to work, to survive, and to bring him home again. And now, dear listener, as we leave the cowboy beneath a sky the color of cooling embers, his horse tied nearby, and the hum of the prairie settling into silence, may you find the same steady peace that comes at the end of a long day's ride. Let the rhythm of hoofbeats carry you towards sleep, slow and sure, until dreams take you across quiet plains beneath an endless field of stars. Life as a cowboy in the 1800s was not for the faint-hearted. The daily grind of hard labor, relentless weather, and the constant challenge of survival demanded an inner strength that few could muster. From the moment a man swung into the saddle before dawn until he unrolled his bedroll beneath the stars, every hour was a test of patience, of endurance, of will. The solitude of the open range, the endless miles of riding, the ache in muscles that never truly rested. These were as much a part of the job as roping cattle or mending fences. The cowboy was forged by these conditions into something more than a laborer. He became a master of his own mind and body, able to adapt and endure no matter what the land or sky decided to throw in his path. Measured against the conveniences of our own time, cars that carry us across miles in minutes, screens that connect us instantly to anyone in the world, shelves stocked with food, no matter the season. The cowboy's life seems almost primitive. There were no shortcuts, no instant relief, no safety nets. But it was this very absence of ease that shaped the toughness and self-reliance that came to define him. Every blister, every dust storm weathered. Every long ride without complaint etched resilience into his bones. And it was this resilience that became part of something larger, the enduring image of the cowboy as a symbol of the American spirit, an emblem of independence and quiet determination. The stories passed down, the traditions kept alive, and the respect still held for those who work the range, are proof of how deeply this way of life has settled into the cultural memory. Even now, long after the cattle drives have faded into history, the cowboy's legacy lingers. It is in the steady hands of a rancher closing a gate against the wind, in the silhouette of a rider moving slow across the horizon, in the music, the poetry, and the tales told by firelight. As the old saying goes, a cowboy's work is never done. And though the work has changed, the spirit behind it remains. It is a reminder that hardship can shape not just survival, but character. That even in a world far removed from the dust and the saddle, we still look to that figure on horseback and see what it means to endure. And now, dear listener, as our trail together comes to an end for tonight, let the image settle in your mind. A lone cowboy, hat brim low against the setting sun, his horse standing quiet beside him, as the prairie stretches away in all directions. The wind moves gently through the grass, carrying the last warmth of the day. The sky above is vast and clear, the first stars beginning to shimmer like grains of silver scattered by an unseen hand. The campfire nearby has burned down to embers, glowing soft and deep, their light flickering against worn leather and the curve of a saddle resting on the ground. In the distance, the cattle shift and murmur in their sleep, and somewhere far off, a coyote calls to the darkness. There is no rush here, no ticking clock, only the slow breathing of the land and the quiet knowledge that tomorrow will bring its own work, its own miles, its own stories. As you close your eyes, imagine lying there beneath that open sky, the earth solid beneath you, the smell of smoke and sage in the air. Feel the cool night wrap around you like a blanket, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats in the distance like a heartbeat lulling you toward dreams. And as you drift, may you carry with you the calm of the prairie, the patience of the trail, and the quiet strength of a life lived close to the land. Sleep well, traveler. Rest deeply, and I will meet you again when the next trail calls.